I will tell you that I would say, at an inflection point in our history. And it's kind of once in a generation. And you think about where we are and look at current events, what's going on in Russia and Ukraine, the joint Russia-PRC statement before the Olympics, missile shots out of North Korea, Taiwan incursions, and then violent extremism that still exists. With all these problems, I look for historical examples and leaderships and mentors that mean something to me to help me think through these problems. And one of those comes from the late Colin Powell. And he said, "The day you are not solving problems or are not up to your butt in problems is probably the day you're no longer leading." We have some problems. And we're facing them that are becoming more complex, more complicated, with increasing uncertainty, and it'll all take leadership to solve. The future may be uncertain, but I'm certain. I'm certain we are all responsible for solving these problems that challenge our national security. I'm certain the consequences of failure are catastrophic. And most importantly, I'm certain that the United States Air Force can execute its missions to fly, fight, and win air power anytime, anywhere. I want to thank the McAleese team for allowing me to be here today. Actually having General Berger come right before me because we are kind of listening to his final comments. We were really synced in many, many ways. And it's really an opportunity for me to come before you, but also what Jim McAleese and his entire team does to keep all of us informed about what's going on in the department and how things impact our national security. And so I'm honored to be part of this 13th annual program and conference, and I want to open up with a few things that's on my mind, with some atmospherics that I see here within the National Capital Region and the Pentagon, a risk framework that I am working on for the United States Air Force, and then some things to think about what the Air Force needs to be doing. I will go back to the 2018 National Defense Strategy, and I really think that it had a ripple effect across the department, because when you think about the way it was written, it actually was a wake-up call. And I've asked others, when the National Defense Strategy was done, who was it written for? Us or for them? I think a little bit of both. Us to wake us up to think about we had to start shifting and thinking about great power competition again, and for them to tell them we're paying attention. And you can look at current events as a good reason why that 2018 National Defense Strategy talked about those 5 challenges. And so as we walk into 2022 and think about the international security strategic guidance laid out by the Biden administration last year, the strategic documents that are in development today, the National Security Strategy, National Defense Strategy, Nuclear Posture Review, Missile Defense Review, and the National Military Strategy, all those are coming together. And I will tell you that the trend line for all those strategies are aligned with what happened in 2018. I'll say there's probably some differences, but by and large, the focus areas for the Air Force, the focus areas for the department, and when we think about national security, are pretty much the same. Now, I think any good strategy needs to be actionable and be resourced. And I'll just tell you, I know we're getting close to a budget, but continuing resolutions are devastating to actually allow us to move forward. Now, I will tell you this, they've kind of become the norm. They become a habit. And think about it, we're 6 months into the fiscal year, and we're just now almost getting the budget. As I think about that, and you look at the past decade, you've passed one budget in the past decade. And if you align all those CRs together, it's over 3 years that we've worked without a budget. If you're trying to accelerate change, you can't be spotting your adversaries 3 years. And so it's important that we continue to work to move forward on providing budgets, because it's going to help us maintain our today's readiness. It's going to help us in recruiting and retaining quality airmen. It'll help us modernize, not only and make sure readiness for today, but modernize for tomorrow, both on the nuclear capabilities and our conventional capabilities as well, and allow us to compete, deter, and win. It's going to impact that with the impacts tied to our capability and capacity for the Air Force, but also for the department. Now, all these changes and all this challenge and all this uncertainty exacerbates risk not only for the Air Force, but also for the Department of Defense. And I really believe that we've got to balance risk over time. And having served as a deputy commander for Combatant Command And now as a service chief, I've seen both sides of the risk coin. The combatant commanders are worried about what's going to happen in the next, next several days, next several weeks, next several years. They're in their job for 3 years. And after their 3 years is done, they don't have to worry about it anymore. As a service chief, I'm in my job for 4 years. But my name's held accountable for many years after that. Being able to organize, train, and equip over not just the next several years, but over the next 5, 10 to 15 years. And how do we balance that risk between the combatant commanders and the services? And that's what I talk about, is balancing risk. If I give all my capability today to the combatant commanders, expend all my readiness, we will not be ready for tomorrow. We've got to be ready not just for today's combatant commander, but their successor and their successor's successor. And so when we think about it, it's really how we balance risk. So I see risk in 4 broad areas. There's warfighting risk, there's foundational risk, there's execution risk, and industrial risk. For warfighting risk, it puts today's and tomorrow's airmen at risk on the battlefield, along with their allies, partners, and our joint teammates. Since Desert Storm, the Air Force is now half the size, and the average age of our fleet has tripled. By comparison, since the 1990s, the People Liberation Army Air Forces has modernized their fighter fleet and increased their flight hours for their pods by over 60%. The Air Force has been continuously deployed in every geographic region of the world for the past 30 years straight. And our rate of change and our rate of modernization has not kept pace with our adversaries. The only thing that's continuously accelerated since Desert Storm is the rate of consumption of air power. The future Air Force must be funded appropriately so we can prevail in a future conflict. And we must fund the transition to today to the Air Force that we're going to need for tomorrow. It'll need investment that'll match and balance between capability and capacity. We can't have all high-end capability in small numbers without capacity of lower-end capability. So it's a mix that we have to have as an Air Force to be able to move forward. And the other part is I work with the combatant commanders. I will just tell you the thing I've been coming to recently as I sit and talk to the combatant commanders, I feel like the United States Air Force is a chew toy between combatant commanders. Because there's not enough Air Force to go around in some cases, and they want us here and there. And this is the beauty of the United States Air Force. When I talk about air power anytime, anywhere, it's the aspect that we can get places in hours and days that may take others to get there in weeks and months. And that's why we're in high demand. And so when I talk to combatant commanders, what I ask them to do is don't fight against the Air Force and start dumping on me because you don't have the capability. I tell them to fight for the Air Force, to ensure we're resourced to provide the capability that they will need as combatant commanders today, but what those successors will need as well. And I expect we'll have continued measured progress towards our modernization and driving down the warfighting risk by decreasing the average age of our fleet. And that's a simple metric to measure. Then there's foundational risk. And it puts our ability to place air power anytime, anywhere at risk. Those foundational risk aspects are our airmen and family programs to ensure that we have quality airmen. Because we cannot do what we do. Every platform we have would be a static display without our airmen and the families that back them up and help them do what we do. It's about readiness, both near-term and long-term, and how we balance that with the combatant commands. It's our flying hour program. It's our weapon system sustainment. It's our decreasing availability of aircraft that we have to pay attention to. It's our infrastructure. Now, I will tell you, we have more base infrastructure than we need today, and that costs us money to maintain that, just like it costs us money to maintain our aging platforms. It's also our IT systems and other foundational things that typically tend to be the bill payer sometimes as we go into our budget cycle. We've really got to pay attention to that. And the thing we talk about inside the Air Force, if we don't take care of it ourselves, the Joint Forces are going to do it for us. And so it's the foundation risk that I'm concerned about. Kind of tied to that is also our force mix between our active, guard, and reserve, and our overseas permanent presence and our stateside presence, so we can actually have a rotational capability as an Air Force. We'll be able to measure our progress towards shoring up our foundational Air Force by how we take a look at our increase in our flying hour program, increase of our weapon systems sustainment buying power, and a decrease in infrastructure backlog repairs. Then there's execution risk. And here's our ability to manage risk over time. As we build out our budget and our plans, we can have the best laid plans. But we find that we have a number of consistent hurdles we have to work through. whether it's internal to the United States Air Force based on debating amongst ourselves, it's debates that we have in the building, it's debates we have with our combatant commands, it's how we work with the White House to get to the final part of the budget and then over to the Hill. And as we work through that, as we have a great plan, there's a lot of interest in the United States Air Force. And with that, we get restrictive language periodically, actually quite often, and it makes it hard for us to actually build a plan that we were able to execute. And the way I feel as a service chief is I've got a lot of needles I got to thread with one piece of thread to keep everybody happy. And so what I tell you is as we work through this, there's going to be some unhappy people. And that's the way it's got to be in order to make sure we have drive down execution risk so we can also drive down warfighting risk. I think the other piece of this is the execution risk I've already highlighted is the CRs and how we're jamming a year's worth of money into a portion of the year. It makes it hard to build a plan. And it makes it hard to execute that plan when you have a lot of uncertainty when it's tied to the budget. And finally, there's the industrial risk. And that industrial-based risk, it really puts not only our capability to create the capacity and capability for our Air Force, but it's also the impact that it puts on current and future companies and put them at risk. I think we've become very efficient at the expense of being effective. And my concern here is our ability to be able to surge, if required, during combat operations, but more so with our aging fleet, the diminishing manufacturing sources, concern of our ability to shrink a number of companies that will work with the Department of Defense or our primes. And I'm worried about our workforce that has the technical skills. Because if we don't keep them employed, they'll walk and do something else. And won't be able to have cutting-edge technology that we've had for our Air Force for many, many years. Now, what must the Air Force do? And we need to do it not just in conflict, but we need to do it day in and day out. And so we value deterrence. And one of the key parts of the three things that or four things that we look at for our national security is that we got to defend the homeland. We must be able to project air power globally and then operate as a part of a joint ally and partner force. And we need to do that by maintaining a bedrock on foundational investments, enabling the Air Force to adapt and succeed in dynamic environments. And so that future Air Force, we've got to be able to connect to and with the joint force. We've got to generate combat power, both in capacity and capability. We've got to conduct logistics counter attack, and we've got to work with allies and partners. And I'll tell you, current events kind of show you the value of allies and partners. And too often, I think we say allies and partners, we put it on a PowerPoint slide, we put it in a strategy document, but we don't deliver. We've got to continue to work really hard with our allies and partners to make them part of the team. As we do all this, the key part here is our strategic deterrence. And the aspect for the Air Force is our nuclear recapitalization, that we have 2/3 of the triad and 3/4 of the nuclear command and control and communications. And folks have talked about over the years about the nuclear bow wave. It's here. And this is something that happens once in a generation. And it puts a squeeze on the Air Force as you look at fully funding nuclear capability. It does put a little squeeze on the conventional capability. And we have to work through all of that together with our joint teammates to make sure we have what we need as an Air Force and as a joint team. And so it's important that we understand that we cannot afford to not do both. We've got to do both as we move forward. Failing to do so, the Air Force can only project air power sometimes in some places, and our job is anytime, anywhere. The Air Force is something that the nation needs. And I think we prove that day in and day out. And I see that now more than ever, particularly as we watch current events and as the world gets more complex and more complicated. We've got to be able to balance the demands of the day as well as the demands of tomorrow to ensure that we're ready today, tomorrow, and the day after tomorrow as an Air Force. And so I want to close on a good news story that demonstrates the resolve of our Air Force and our airmen. You've seen in the news here recently how air power can deploy and be operating in just mere hours and can deploy the joint force in just a matter of days. And we've proven time and time again that we can work seamlessly with our allies and partners around the world. Having a ready and responsive Air Force with relationships around the world and the ability to operate seamlessly does not happen overnight. It was because of the deliberate effort of our outstanding airmen over many years that created the most powerful Air Force in the world and in the history of the world. I'm honored to be the chief as the United States Air Force celebrates its 75th anniversary this year. And we must transition and balance risk so we can stand ready to deter and be prepared for conflict if deterrence fails for another 75 years or more. As a leader, and as leaders, for all of us here in the room and those that are watching, we must continue to solve problems of today and tomorrow, no matter how complicated or complex. If we're not working together to solve problems, we're not leading. And losing our advantage becomes a distinct possibility. Thank you for the opportunity to be here with you today, and look forward to your questions.
I see. Go ahead, sir. And while we're waiting for him, can I throw out the first one, sir?
Sure.
You and both General Berger have been on this position of the system doesn't get it, the China pacing threats coming, wake up, pay attention. Do you believe that's finally percolating into the building? Do you see it in Congress? Do you see it in DOD? And does this wake-up call with Ukraine has that helped to jolt the system toward the urgency that you are so calling desperately for?
You know, I guess I wouldn't say people don't get it. I think we all understand it. It's just a matter of our process and how things work and how you make a big shift. Or, I've talked about bureaucracy as well, in bureaucratic organization, how you make this shift. I do think that the events in Ukraine, although it's early, it puts a little pressure on us to see that things may happen that we may not be fully expecting. If we don't wait till a crisis comes to actually drive change. What I'm trying to do is drive the change before we get there, because you can read the tea leaves and you can kind of see some of these things coming. And what I find, the more and more that I engage, I know with Dave Berger as well, you get more and more traction with the aspect, and the current events probably help us better appreciate that we've got to make some changes. Yeah.
Hi, sir. Scott Porter. First, compliments. I don't know how you made that tough choice to pick a winner at Spark Tank in Orlando last week. For those of you who don't know, Spark Tank is the Air Force's version of Shark Tank, and it's really something to watch.
Very talented airman.
So, sir, picking up on your theme, trying to thread several needles with one thread, what's your current feeling on being able to resource the current legacy TAC Air fleet? Is that realistic at this point, or are there other things that might get in that way?
Well, one of the things that we, as we went into 22 and we looked at our fighter fleets, we have 7 fighter fleets. And we're probably one of the few air forces that has that many different fleets of aircraft, which makes it complicated. It challenges our logistics chain. It challenges our weapon system sustainment. And so what we're looking to do is get down to 4 fighter fleets. And part of that is being able to retire some of the platforms to get down to what would be next generation air dominance. The F-22 is kind of tied into that, so the F-22 will stick around until we get next generation air dominance. The F-35, which is going to be the cornerstone, and it'll be the largest fighter fleet, once we get a few years down the road, because right now the largest fighter fleet we have is the F-16. And as we bring down some of the pre-block F-16s and keep the older, newer post-block F-16s, the F-35 and F-16s will switch places, and then the F-15E, EX. And so that's what we're trying to get to. And by doing that, and buying newer fighters, we can start to drive down that average age, will actually help us decrease the cost. We still have the A-10. The A-10 is a great platform for yesterday. Think about it. It is a great platform, but as you look to the future and in more complex environments, we got to have multi-capable and multi-role fighters. And so, it's a part of our transition, and that's what we're trying to get to, is the 4 fighter fleet over the next couple of FIDEPs. Yeah.
Sir, Bill Conley. I had the honor of getting an invitation to the Spectrum Warfare Wing activation last summer, which was phenomenal to see the Air Force do. Current events, as you mentioned earlier, the role of information, the role of deceiving your adversary is obviously incredibly critical. How do you feel about the Spectrum Warfare Wing and the Air Force's capabilities today, a year after it was activated?
I think we're making progress, and I think current events kind of show you not so much deceiving our adversaries, but putting the truth out there in a timely manner. And it's really basically to understand it. But the other part of the Spectrum Warfare Wing is we have, from an electronic warfare perspective, we didn't have to worry about that for the past 20 to 30 years in the Middle East, because our violent extremists weren't carrying high-end jammers. We got to really rethink that when you start thinking about our near-peer or peer adversaries. It gets more complex, and things move at the speed of software. And I was an electronic combat pilot when I was a lieutenant and captain, and knowing how we did serene, bite, and pace aware, where you actually reprogram based on the threat can change like that. We got to move much faster, and I do see some of that with current events. Part of the thing I was talking to my staff about is many things we've been talking about we weren't able to do for whatever reason. You have a little bit of a crisis, everybody who said no now is starting to say yes. Okay, we got to start driving some internal crises amongst ourselves before we have a big crisis to drive change in our policies and processes, particularly in this area, because so much of it's software-based. The other aspect is information. And with our intelligence community, being able to get that information out, and there's so much in the open source that you can we're worried about sources and methods. Well, there's many ways you can obscure how you got that information as we move forward. And so information will play a huge role, it's playing a huge role today. I think it'll play a huge role in the future as well. Yeah.
Okay, there we go. Hi, Pat Tucker from Defense One. Good to see you again, sir. Sorry to harp on current events, but I wonder if events over the last couple of weeks have given you any change in or caused any new thinking in how you would outfit Eastern Europe from an air warfare perspective. And if you wanted to touch quickly also on F-35s to Poland, I think that there's some appetite there for that. So how would the events of the last few weeks change your perception on air warfare in Eastern Europe and what the U.S. can and should do?
Yeah. For me personally, it hadn't really changed, partly because these are the things I was already talking about, accelerate, change, or lose, is we got to be thinking about where we are on, when I go back to the 2018 National Defense Strategy, how it laid those things out. These are the things we've been thinking about for the past several years. And so for the Air Force to transition to where we need to be, that's the path we're on. I think it helps us to get there maybe a bit faster with a little more sense of urgency because of current events. I also think it shows the value of the F-35 and the number of F-35 nations that are in Europe, and Poland on the cusp of being one of those. And the fact that we're using F-35s in Europe today as part of with NATO is a plus, and working with our other F-35 partners that are European countries. So many things are kind of coming together in some aspects. My heart goes out to the people of Ukraine, seriously. But we were able to bring together the international community. We were able to drive down some of the barriers that we've had. It's interesting. We're moving meetings forward to make decisions that we're going to be, later on some things that we're going to help not only us, but our allies and partners as well. And I just want to keep that momentum going forward as the chief. Okay.
Andy Cox with GKN Aerospace. I know it's a concern of Secretary Kendall, certainly yourself, and definitely General Wilsbach out in the Pacific, about your air-based survivability, about hardening. And to some degree, ACE gets to that, Agile Combat Employment gets to that. But I just want you to talk to us a little bit about where we are in ACE and what's the future of it.
Right. So for Agile Combat Employment, if you're not familiar, it's the aspect of being able to be agile and be able to bounce around different bases versus being at very static bases. You think about what we've done for the past 30 years in the Middle East. We've built out bases very expeditionary. They're expeditionary, but they're very permanent in some aspects. And they're really plussed up. And so our airmen, when they travel and move to these bases, they just show up. Everything's already there for them. The concept of ACE is being able to go to austere locations, operate, and then pack up and move. How do we actually drive ourselves to be lighter, leaner, and more agile? So you don't bring everything, bring what you actually need. And so it's driven us as an Air Force to kind of really take a look at our logistics. I think the other aspect that we've talked a bit more about is pre-positioning. If you think about how we do our war reserve material, we usually set it someplace, and we park them all, all same types in different areas. How do we pack them as a capability so you can actually move that stuff around very quickly using the exercises? The other part is the mindset of our airmen and the concept of multi-capable airmen. When we go to conflict, I can't have any union cards. Okay? What I actually need is airmen that are going to be able to execute. You're going to probably do more than things that you were actually trained for. And what I've told our airmen is that we don't want to train you to be multi-capable. We want you to have the mindset of being multi-capable, because there's some things you can do well beyond your career field in a conflict. And I've seen this in contingencies time and time again. Our airmen are really excited about that aspect. And so with Agile Combat Deployment, it doesn't mean now you have to harden a base. What you do is try to complicate things for your adversary. And if you look at the PRC, the way they're very analytical in how they operate things. And having taken some higher level calculus, what they're trying to do is they're trying to solve, or algebra, they're trying to solve for X. When they solve for X, they'll feel confident that they can actually go execute. Our job is to continue to change X, to make it complicated. And don't just glue things where you go, we know exactly where they are. If we shoot there, they're going to be there. Well, how about if we prove that we can operate from just about any airfield in the Indo-Pacific? And the more we're able to do that, the more it complicates things for our adversary. At the same time, it helps our airmen to be more resilient, because you're not going to be able to harden you don't want to try to harden every base in the Indo-Pacific, but you got to have some active and passive defense, and part of that defense is ACE. And so for the Air Force is really putting money behind this, which we're doing, but at the same time building the energy with our airmen and with our major command commanders, air component commanders, to lay out some of these requirements. So I'll tell you, we're pretty well aligned. And before we could even agree on a name, we're much past that now. And I'm really excited to see what our airmen are doing. Thanks.
Okay.
So with the events recently in Ukraine, do you see an opportunity for reapproachment with Turkey on the F-35 program? Your opinion?
Well, that's kind of a policy. I'll pass on that one. Now, what I do see is there's opportunities with our allies and partners. And this is where, just think about some of the policy shifts that other countries have made over the course of the past several weeks. And so any challenge like this, any crisis like this provides an opportunity. So I can't speak for our policymakers, but I think every one of these provides an opportunity in some form or fashion.
Got time for one more question. Jim, are you taking that?
What he's so perceptive. Look, just because the microphone was up to my lips, sir. Sir, you haven't had a chance at all to talk. Just two last thoughts. Number one, I personally believe that the Air Force is the only one that has the depth of magazine to be able to find, fix, and finish basically about 1,250 Chinese URBMs. That would include the DF-17, the DF-21, DF-26 that would be targeted at Guam, and of course the carrier strike group's number one. But that, I defer to you as to whether or not is that true. Are you going to be in a China fight? Will you be the primary find, fix, and finish, most likely, number one? And number two, to the extent you're comfortable, would you also make sure that you foot stomp what you believe the key pieces of the nuclear triad recap should be from your perspective?
So, I wouldn't say it's just the Air Force that's kind of primary in this role. If we're going to find, fix, and finish, I'm going to need the Space Force. As I call my little brother.
He is kind of tall, sir.
Well, he is kind of tall, but he's only 2 years old. No, but I will tell you, myself and General Raymond have a really good working relationship, and we know we need each other to be able to execute, whether it's day-to-day or in conflict. And to be able to, find, fix, and finish, I'm going to need the Space Force and their capability. I'm going to need other parts of the joint team to be able to do this. Yes, sir. But when I look at the Indo-Pacific, though, I think there's going to be space, cyber, and air. There will be some airtime because there's a lot of water out there. Yes, sir. But air will have a key role. And so I think that that's something we collectively got to be thinking about as we go forward. Yes, sir. As we look at the nuclear modernization, GBSD, we've got to have it. You think about what's going on with the Chinese in their western deserts and how they're building out their capability. One way to deter is have a capability that goes against that, and we're well on a path with GBSD. B-21 is on a good path. We're up to number 6 in production, and then LRSO is another, and then the NC-3 we've got to really take a hard look at as well and continue to work all those. So, I mean, those are the key Air Force programs. They're all on good path. I've had a chance to meet with our industry partners on these as well. And this is one of the key things I think is important is the collaboration we have with industry. And if you go back and look at Accelerate, Change, or Lose, I put collaboration in there purposely. The collaboration to me is so, so important. We cannot be talking past each other or competing against each other internally. I mean, there's competition is somewhat good, but at some point we got to slap the table and go, we're going to move forward. And then how do we work together very closely to ensure we're providing the capability that our airmen and our joint teammates need. And part of that is a nuclear portfolio, and I think everything else the Air Force needs. And it go back to those 4 risks I talk about. And how do we collectively drive down all 4 of those risks so warfighting is the least of our concerns? Okay? If warfighting is the least of our concerns, we can flourish in all the other areas, where it's in industry, how we execute, and how we, foundational, how we take care of our airmen and families. But I think it's an important aspect that we got to pay attention to.
Well spoken, sir.
Right.
Please join me in welcoming General Morale.